Good afternoon, my name is Luc Wallays. I'm the CEO of OMGEVING. OMGEVING is a Flemish or a Dutch word. It means surroundings, it means ambiente, as we call. So it's difficult to translate, but it tells the key element where we find our daily goal is to create a thrilling, nice, omgeving an environment for the people. Today I will present landscape architecture within OMGEVING, but we are with 60 people. The 60 people that are on a daily basis not only work with landscape, but also in urban planning, urban design, and architecture. This is the average age is about 28. It's a young office, although we are 40 years old. And we are a corporation. That means that of these 60 persons, 28 are owners of the firm. So I'm lucky I've been elected by those 28 to represent the office during 6 years. After 6 years there's a new election. So whenever you feel the need, you can maybe one day become boss of this office. And the idea behind it is, like Kobe also tell you, that we strongly believe that the people that work for us are OMGEVING, not one face, not one hand. It's the cooperation and the collaboration within these 60 persons that is the success of our office. We work mainly in Flanders. Flanders, the north part of Belgium, is known as being one of the most dense build-up sites of Europe. And whatever you see here is the central part of Flanders, and everything what's black is built-up. So you can imagine that the landscape within Flanders is always an urbanized landscape. And we call it the urban sprawl. People live everywhere, not like in Slovenia, where there's still a big difference between not built and not built. We're built everywhere and in every place. And now we have big problems with that. But now they discovered landscape architecture as part of the solution how to deal with this problem. I will show you a few projects that we are dealt with the last 5 years. The things where we are occupied for the moment, and also a project that really emphasizes the way we think about landscape architecture. The first plan is the play landscape for Beringen. Beringen is a city in the middle of the old coal mine region from Belgium. It's part of a huge coal mine region that stretches all the way to Germany, Holland, and even goes to the north of France. And the middle part for Flanders is Beringen. And like everywhere, the coal mine industry went away and left this kind of landscapes behind. The old industry, all the factory buildings, and then the landscape, the terrails, the hill of wasted coals that still are there and are waiting for a new destination. After 25 years of not knowing what to do with them, the municipalities are really understand that this is maybe the new basis for a new future for their cities. So this is in touristical opportunities. This is not a hot item. And we was also part of a competition with from offices all over the world. But we won this competition by a simple idea. A simple idea is that in all our projects we try to stay as close by the original idea of the place as possible. We are not going to invent something that not belongs to the spot, to this place. So this is the assignment was to create a playground in these surroundings, and this is a hill, 50 meters different from the bottom to the top, and make it playable. but make sure that it's also safe and they're doing all requirements. But how do you do that? With a limited budget, also with a contractor as part of our team. So we had to make sure that for 700,000 euros we could build this site. Not a penny more. This is the project. It's so simple because we didn't invent anything new. It's a maze of poles, not just because we like the maze of poles, but the poles and the way they're structured is the way the tunnels underneath in the coal mines were structured. The shafts of the coal mine and the dimensions are just the dimensions here. So when children play on this hill, they have a reconnection about how coal miners 25 years ago underneath here, this hill, were working. Also the idea of how could we organize a playground here, we reflected towards the coal miners itself, because coal mining and working in the mine was a hard labor. So we said maybe we should also envision a playground that it's harder and harder to go to the top. So it is an effort. And you only succeed to go to the top if you collaborate with other children. So in a way, by helping each other, you can reach the top. So in this staircase that goes from down below to above here, the steps are always getting harder and harder, higher and higher. So we like to tease people. But there's also an idea that the higher you get, the more rough it gets, and so that the little children can play on the lower side, and the higher it gets, for the elderly people can go to the higher side. So that is also a kind of safety control without any fence. But this is the maze that we organized. It's also this kind of land art project you can see. But within the maze, there are all the objects, the playing objects for all different kinds of people. Central in the maze, you have an object. It's a concrete paradigmas, voids that are folded and way to the top, and also have all kinds of holes. So you can imagine you're in a mine, come out again and up again, and also some ropes to get up. All the climbing elements, but it's a kind of element that really challenges children to conquer and to try to get to the top. That's for the more elderly people. Within the maze, like I said already, is all these kind of elements that people, youngsters, are challenging to go to the top. Where did we get that idea about those poles? Not only from the historical pictures like this one, historical pictures like this one. It was striking us that we were in the museum that was in the site. It was striking us that coal mining in those days was as much as wood as there were coal. There was an enormous amount of wood needed for those shafts, and also the whole industry that goes along with it had an idea that to reuse this kind of wood for the new future. So that's what I was telling earlier. We try to stay as close by the historical sense as possible. And tiny element. It used to be also a naked terrain. It was naked, and we like to have to make it naked again, because it's more the ambience that we try to achieve than fully green-grown terrain, because it softens the experience too much. So that's why we used black rubber, black concrete elements, black ropes, and they will eventually go grey, those poles, so that it really gets back to as grey as possible, and eventually the green, the places that are not used that much, will turn into a green surface again. And you see, the higher you get, there's also a viewpoint here. The rougher it gets, it's really steep to get there. It's also black. It's also with a product with coal in it, so that it really has this black surface. And it's also, you can see, it's rather rough to climb on it. So surely the harder parts. But eventually, you see here the steps are getting higher and higher. Eventually, if you're almost there, then you come to this place. And this place is the top, but it's also an inclination. Instead of what was also the question of the jury or the question of the municipality, he said, can you create on the top of the hill another platform for a viewpoint? To us, it looks very strange to organize a viewpoint when you're on top of a viewpoint. That is some combination of the two. So we said, we don't take that money, we will not use that money to make a platform and to stand here. When you're here, you have already a big viewpoint. So we had other idea. We changed when we dig out about 2 meters, so you have an inside of the hill. So in a way, you could re-envision what's below it. So because it was all green, we could not imagine anymore why there is a hill like this. But it's an artificial hill, and by making a black square on top of it, we give an insight in the history of this place. Second element why we did that is because of the wind. When you're up on top of there, it's incredibly windy. It's always windy. So we said a lot of people just went away after half an hour because it was too windy. So by lowering this square and then by making it almost 2.5 meters here, you're outside of the wind. You can really, the wind is just flowing over you. You're covered for the wind. But while walking to the edges, you go back to 1.5 meters, then you have a perfectly 360 degree view around the city or around the city from Beringen. And we have one entrance for all the materials, but for the rest of the square, it's a round. It's just a way that you can do a boardwalk, or you can just have a lower walk. And on the sunny side, we make the bench, a long sunny bench that you can sit in the sun. And here you see the connection with the playground. And when you see that people always go to that edge to try to manifestate themselves toward that edge, toward that scale, enormous scale of the province of Limburg in the east of Flanders. And when you're on top of there, you have a magnificent view to the other mine pits in that region. And the mine pits in that region go to the north of Calais. It's more than 200 kilometers away from this point, but it really gets you an insight in what the distance and where the gold mine region evolves to. And you see also that this is the old industry with everything was due to the old energy, and the new energy, the windmills, are taking over. So also the energy transition is also very feasible and very alive when you're up top of that hill. And now these days, we get a lot of questions about, can we organize a party here? Can we organize here? Recently, Porsche made a commercial here with a red Porsche in a black surface. So that was the basic idea, that we provide a place, a space that and everybody who feels like it or has a big idea or a good idea can use this space on a permanent basis. Just use it and leave it as an empty space again. A second project is the Abbey of Averboden. It's part of a big master plan we made for the province of Antwerp, for the whole region. What's called the Merode. It's a rather green area with a few abbeys in 10 square meters somewhere. It used to be the central place for the old kind of monks that controlled the whole region. Also let the region flourish with their agricultural events that they took in account. And while making the big master plan, the monks that live in this abbey, they asked us, do you have any ideas for our place? And we said, oh yes, of course, we could imagine some new ideas. And we started within the abbey, the central square, but we presented first the outdoor avenues that we restored, and after that also the extension of the abbey here in this south corner. Averboden, like I told you, is known for his books, for his for the monks, and it's so popular. This is also something we redesigned. I think this was 1 year ago. When it was finished, this is the place to be for all the touristical bike routes. Just pass by there, and there's an ice cream. Very known for his ice cream, so thousands of people come there in Sunday afternoon to fetch an ice cream and to sit there in this neighborhood. It's the most popular in Belgium. They can track all these GSMs, and this point is the most popular in all of Flanders. It's kind of strange that you see a lot of people here. A lot of people are just passing by, because the Abbey of Averboden is known to be a silent place. They really cherish their silence. And one of the access towards silence is this one. It's just nearby where all the people are. This is an old access towards the chapel that was fully overgrown, and not many people knew that the axe was there. So we created a new avenue with the new trees, and we make it as natural as possible towards this little chapel in the woods. And eventually you come to this, and this is the new steps we introduced, and then with this simple line, so as minimalistic as possible. On the way back, you have a real nice view towards the trees. And then we go enter the monastery. And to enter the monastery is really a gate. You have to pass. And then you see this. I didn't put in a picture of how it was. It was a car park. We've seen a lot of car parks today. This was also a car park. And I remember to walk with the monk outside. We had a meeting in here, and we had to walk through the cars. And the monk says, I said, it's a shame that there are cars here. And the monk says, how do you mean? I said, it would be perfectly square here. I said, he said, if you have a good idea, just make a sketch. And then we had and this is the sketch we made. And why did we make this sketch so simple? Because the idea is, the basic idea of the monk, when he was he's a very nice man, he said, to me, the most important thing is silence. And I said, how we can translate in a design silence? How do we do that? So every design effort has to be very, very well overtaken. We have to make sure that only the essential thing we design, not
not doing design for the design. Just to do only do the things that really are necessary to reorganize this space. But this was, and for many people ask us, is this all you did? But I think we've done the most, if you see the result. So what did we do? We put in a mirror of water in central square. Only this. And the mirror reflects all the buildings. So, and the thing is, why we did that? Because we admire the buildings, of course, but also the idea, and it works like that. People come here with their ice cream, and they just fall down in quietness, because they understand there's something special going on there. So, eventually, a lot of people stay there, because they're afraid to enter, because the atmosphere is totally different from the outside. And they first eat their ice cream, and then they go in. They understand that this is a special place, they have to act differently. And then they start a walk, and they start to walk because this is, of course, very tempting to see if you're entering, if you're entering, you see the mirror, and so you think, oh, I want to see. And the more the people come closer, they first see the reflection of the buildings, eventually they see the reflection of themselves. And that was the idea, that also the reflection of yourself, you have confronted with your own. And then a lot of people just make a walk around the mirror. And for some reflection. This is the few of these images. Like these people just would make a stroll around. We choose different materials from this side. This is more black granite, very plain, and in a pattern that there is no enforcement to the lines. So all the is the most important thing. You see how it works. And a lot of people come to sit here and just admire the reflection of the monastery and the church in this mirror. Sometimes the mirror cracks. Sometimes people dare to take over and really crack the mirror. And sometimes it was such a success in the warm weather that the monks have to intervene because it became a playground. So once the mirror is cracked, a lot of people dare to walk in the mirror. But the mirror, in fact, the mirror is a fountain, but a silent one. Because we had a lot of conversation with all the people who are specialists in mirrors like this, fountains like this, and they said you have to make sure that the water is pumped around, otherwise it will turn green. So we had to find a solution how we can make it, avoid it that it becomes green and still have a mirror. So we constructed, the fountain is in the middle, but it's down below. So, and it's just so controlled that it just goes over the edges here, and it goes back again. We have a buffer here, so that the water is pumped constantly around, but you don't see it. So also the fountain is in that conceptual idea of silent, to be silent. And in that sense, it's also very durable because it's filled with rainwater. It's only rainwater from the surface and the buildings, and now it's in 3 years in active, and they didn't have to pump any water towards it. So it helps itself, it maintains itself in a system. And when you think we've seen it all, then the night appears. And then when you're lucky, you can see a monk floating over the water. Not really floating, he's walking around, same complementation. But And also for the monks, this was the perfect answer towards the aspiration and also the ambition that they had, that their monastery should present silence in a way. And when you have a good night and when there's no wind, I could tell you that this picture is upside down, but it's not. But it's the perfect mirror of what to know. By the success of the square, they asked us to also work on the extension of the barn, where they now sell beer, of course they're monks, and cheese and bread. So also in this way we try to minimize effort together with an architectural office who did all the furniture, but with this magnificent view towards the inner courtyard. Also the new introductions, like Kobe already said, how to preserve the existence and to put in something new with as much as possible respect towards what there is and not to demolish while still functioning. Then something completely different. This is the memorial park for the 100-year remembrance of the First World War, 1914-18, where the Belgium was big enough, the battlefield for together with France, of many enormous fights. And this is the city of Ypres, and this is the frontier between Germany and this kind was German, and this was for the Allies, mainly British, and they fought during 4 years in this battlefield. And the province of West Flanders, they asked us to, because they expected that it's doing at this moment, there's a lot of people coming, to make all these sites accessible again, because the war fields, until now there was not much attention towards them, but now they expect 1 million people coming to see these sites and to make sure that these were accessible and that the sites were not overrun by people, and that they had to organize a little bit the sites. One of these sites is this is the bluff. This is a crater of a bomb that was 100 years ago, that's created new nature and water, and in this day there were no trees anymore, so this was a real battle zone. And when we first came there, this looked like this, and they said, you have to make this as accessible for all kinds of people, also for handicaps. Everybody has to make sure that they can do sightseeing on this place. So that was not easy to organize, seeing the height difference. This is the sketches we made. One of the elements we said, it's kind of strange on a graveyard to make some design. We didn't want to introduce a kind of smart design and to make us as present as possible. We didn't want to be there. If once we did our design, they should forget about us as a designer. So we wanted to make it as plain as possible and the intervention as simple as possible. So this is the intervention. I will show you a picture of this site. Then you have to walk this alley. Here you have a kind of shelter where there's a little introduction about the war that was going on there. And this is the pathway that goes all the way until here. Here are a few steps, and then this is a viewpoint on the battlefield. This line we didn't design. This line is more or less the same lines from the trenches that people fought in. And that they were in these trenches and they fought a war there. So we said we really try to follow these lines as much as possible, and also organize the elements that people have to walk after one another. You don't have a small talk and walk in while you're in those battlefields. No, you really have to experience the way that people, the soldiers experience this space. All the things they ask us to do, because there are a lot of groups that are coming. Now and then you have to have a little bit more space that a guide could tell something about the war scene that's been taking place there, and also for the handicapped people with a wheelchair that they can turn back that way. This is the entrance with the car park and the bicycle, very plain concrete like they used to use there a lot. This is the shelter. This is no architecture. We didn't want to make architecture. We want as simple as possible shelter. A shelter with some information about the war scene. And this is the pathway through the woods towards the battle zone, where we put a wooden floor that really floats above with the surface, and makes it possible that all people can enter the zone. Here you see a little bigger space where a guide could give some information about this crater, and then you can go on like this. Eventually we have to introduce some steps, but you see we try to really not touch the soil, because the soil, in this soil, there's still a few hundred or thousand people buried, and also bombs. So we didn't want to touch the soil. Eventually you reach a viewpoint that gives you an idea of the battlefield. This is the battlefield between, you can't imagine it these days, but this was the battlefield between the Allies and the Germans. They were so close to each other. They couldn't really talk to each other. And they really actually talked to each other. And this was the battle zone. They called it no man's land. That was a no man, nobody could go there, because when you were in here, you were shot. Sure. This is how it looked. So this is landscape after war. This is no tree. There was not one tree alive after the war. And this was the landscape that from all the craters and all the bombs that were produced there or bombed there. From out of the air, you can see the war was won by the Allies. One night they put 19 bombs together in one scenery. This is the bombs, and it goes further on here. And that was the reason that the Germans eventually sieged, because they said, okay, we can't cope with that, too much force. These are all the trench holes where people were fighting for. And this is also the central part of the Hill 60, one of the hill where the most people died. And this is the model we made. This is all the craters, they're still there. There's also the same system like we introduced in the other pictures, with the pathway that just follow the trenches of the war. Yeah. Trying to make sure that people can really go to a certain monument to give their respect, and then to go back again. Another image. Now it seems like a nice park, but it's really a battlefield. And to show that, this is all the blue and all the is contaminated elements. Say that they did an investigation, and they say here are people buried. Make sure that you don't touch those people. And the green also are bomb areas. So maybe there is some bombs. So if you touch the thing can explode. So this became so difficult that from the whole project we only could realize the half of it, because it was so costly. it cost so much, because for each hole we digged, we had to have a monitor to see if there were no bombs involved. Also, the silence also here prevails, that we said also in signing we didn't put any big signs. All the signing is also part of the floor, and so that also the tranquility of the place is kept in order. Another also a cemetery, but it's a crematoria. The crematoria in Flanders, there's about 60 or 70% of the people are now in the crematoria buried, not more in the classical graveyard. This is the project that the very famous architect in Belgium, Hussein Goris, together with the very famous Barcelona architect RCR, won by a competition for Flemish Bouwmeester, and they asked us to do the landscape. And when you enter the site, this is the parking space, and you have no building inside. You don't see any building because of this green wall here, this vegetation wall. The first thing they did is to preserve this landscape element. The classical architects would surely demolish it and said, this should be my building. They really understand how the landscape works. That's why we like to work with them together. And then say, no, we will keep it. And after this landscape element, the building reveals itself. You will go down to in the building, and the building is just a long concrete building with cast iron around it that really goes well with the landscape. And when you go closer and closer, you really envision also a large pond that really creates distance from that side. But it's also part of it, because there is the underneath surface is clay and the water stays on there. So we said, why do a lot of effort to get rid of the water? We just keep the water. So we don't fight against nature, we use nature. So this is one of the sides of the building, and we didn't do anything special to have this water. We just digged out a little bit and the water stays there. Also we put it on this side, the water, so that the whole building really is reflected in the water. Also the urns of the people who died are put in this landscape element as. So we did also no effort, because this is a fruit yard for pears. So we kept it in the landscape. We didn't put a fence on it, round it off. No, this is part of the landscape. And when people are buried, they go back to the landscape. So keep it as simple as possible. This is one of the most popular crematoria in Flanders for the moment. No, you're too young. This is a public park. So whenever you feel in the neighborhood, you can also go walk in the park. I want to end with something totally special. We were, as an office, we work also a lot with infrastructure. Like in the green infrastructure, but then the real, because of the urbanization of Flanders, we need to deal with infrastructure on a daily basis. And we were asked by the people's movement, Ringland, and the people's movement was based in Antwerp, and they were fed up with the highway that goes runs through the city. And it makes a lot of noise, enormous noise, and a lot of pollution, enormous pollution. And it's one that, if you see on all kind of images and maps, this is the most polluted area in all of Europe. And people live next to this highway. And it's not longer, there has to be something done, but because it's an enormous project, and the government didn't want to pay any money for it, the movement said, we do it by ourselves. And they did a crowdfunding organization, and they collected about 100,000 euros. 100,000 euros, they asked, for this 100,000 euros, they asked a mobility plan. They asked for doctors to do investigation about lung disease, and they asked us to make a site plan and a design for this all new space. And this was our plan. Today this is all open, and the cars are driving here without a cap. They're driving in this one of the busiest highways in Europe. So you can imagine what kind of noise and pollution that gives. So the basic idea was just put a cap in it, on top of it, and on the surface we could introduce a new park. A park of 11 kilometers. And one of the biggest parks, central parks you can imagine in Europe. Of course it costs a lot of money. But the basic idea that here that the park really could go all the way to the north and a little bit to the east. And we, as a landscape designers and as urban planners, we really digged into the mobility system. Because the mobility, all the mobility system engineers of the Flemish government said there is no other solution than the solution that we foresee. Because this was a flyover, the biggest one, a very big flyover. Also, there's a big flyover here and here. And they said the flyover you have to keep, there's no other possibility. So we invented a fly under. So if you can fly over, you can fly under. And they never had thought about that. That you, instead of going over the highway, you could go under the highway. And by doing that, we could make the park continuously all over. We didn't have any big knots anymore, mobility knots. To show this, this is the highway that runs through the city. And this is on the viaduct, so it's about 12 meters above the level here. So it produces even more noise. And this is what the system we set. It's very easy. If you put it underneath, it could be a totally new area, living area, because nobody can live here today because there's too much pollution and noise. And this is the images we produced by making green river avenues. Green avenues, people can live alongside the water, and you get a totally new fabric, urban fabric, and a green structure in the middle of the city, without removing the mobility. The mobility is important, but it's on the place and underneath it. So it works as a total system. One of the most driving pictures we produced, I think, was this one. This is over 112 meters of highway, only one functional, only for cars and lorries and all that. I said, by just making this, we can really integrate the highway underneath and make a total new fabric, so people are inclined to live along this park instead of avoiding the park. So it's just a matter of thinking, rethinking this kind of incredibly big surfaces that are now monofunctional only for mobility reasons. Another part, we could create a totally new neighborhood where now there's nothing else to foreseen than cars and cars and cars and lorries and lorries. So by just putting the highway underneath it, we could really make a new urban corridor connected towards all the public transport. Really, because there's a need of new dwellings in Antwerp for over 200,000. And the municipality of the city of Antwerp is asking themselves, where would we put it? So you have to put in the city, not outside of the city, otherwise you will create even more mobility problems. And by the success of this approach and by the success of the civil movement of Ringland, the Flemish government was obliged to organize a competition for itself, because he said next year there are elections in Belgium, important elections, and the local government said we will make sure that these elections, we will not lose this election because all Ringland will gain a lot of votes for this kind of plan. We'll do it our own plan. So they organized a big competition, and not by coincidence, but a lot of people who are today also are already in this competition.
Sorry.
So we're colleagues, we're colleagues. We are here. So, but this is the way, I think, for the future, an important lesson, that civil movements, people, if real people are convinced of something, and with the multimedia that we have today, and with the image and with the knowledge we have today, we can really provoke the politically class to really go in action and to do something. So I think that's a big success. If within 10 years, the first thing, the first half should be realized. This should be realized, and then afterwards, this whole piece will be realized. Then probably we don't have to come to Slovenia, but Slovenia can come to us to see what an amazing park we have in Antwerp. Thank you.